Uh, it should be because like that's the end of the day. Yeah. So our today's topic is sampling designs and procedures. So as you know that in the last class we learned how to write down a questionnaire. We have learned what are the guidelines for a good questionnaire. So once you are done with your questionnaire, that means once you have made a foundation for your survey, now the next question is to whom you should send your questionnaire. Okay? So here comes the sampling design. So now you need to determine your sample. Those will actually be answering your questions. So basically, we will start with discussing why we need to go for sample rather than a census. That means why don't we examine all the potential elements or all the potential respondents? Why we just go for a subset of them? Why you need to go for a sample? We will be talking about different types of sampling procedures: probability sampling, non-probability sampling. We will discuss a little bit of advantages and disadvantages of these sampling procedures. And last of all, we will discuss what are the factors we should consider while we choose a particular sampling design. So first of all, as I said, that we will start our discussion with understanding why do we need to go for sampling. So to build up this understanding, we need to know some terminologies that we use throughout this chapter. Those are like population, census, sample. Actually, population and sample, those are two related terms to use. Probably all of you understand that when we say population, we actually refer to the complete set of the entities we try to survey. Okay? Again, I say the complete set of entities. For example, if we say managers, if we say students, if we say customers, if we say doctors, then when we say population, we actually refer all managers. We refer all students, all doctors. So that's a population, complete set of potential respondents. But when we say sample, we actually refer to a subset of that population. Okay? For example, if we say that we will be surveying students of Newcastle University, then currently around 40,000 students enrolled in Newcastle University. So population means all these 40,000 students. Okay? Now if we say that we will be going for a sample of 500 students, so it actually comes that we will choose 500 students from these 40,000. So 500 students, that's a subset of the population. So that is sample, subset of the entire population. Okay? And census, I think you are familiar with this term, census. Do you? Census means when we examine or when we investigate the entire population. That we call census. But if we examine or if we investigate sample or a subset of the population, then we call it sampling. Okay? That means sometimes it might be possible, although not very commonly, it might be possible that we examine the entire population. Then we will be calling it a census. However, if we examine, and that we commonly do, if we examine a subset of the population, then we will be calling it sampling. Now, once we understand the population and sample, census and sampling, the next question is, why do we need to go for a sampling? Or why do we need to go for a subset of the population rather than examining the entire population? Which one you think better? A census or a sampling? Hmm? Sampling. Why?
Normally the sample choose you have your own reasons for the research.
Okay.
So maybe it's representing much more compared with the whole population.
So you can decide your sample by yourself that you want to meet.
Yes.
Okay. Might be more cost effective. Okay. So which one you think should generate more accurate result? A census or a sampling? Hmm? Sampling or census? Sample? Hmm?
It's complicated.
What?
Well,
Answering the question or census?
yeah, both. Well, say the survey was something that required a complicated. It was a complicated topic. I'm not defining it very well here. By having a census. So firstly, there's the expense of conducting a census on the whole population, which may be all the doctors, maybe the whole country. And if you're having to employ lots of people to ask those nuanced questions, then you may not get accurate results because you won't have the skill in the interviewers to be able to do that. But if you take a sample, you can recruit properly, you can train properly, and you can direct their energy to where it needs to go as far as conducting the survey.
Okay, okay. Apparently, we may think that census should generate more accurate result. We might think. Why? Because when we are doing a census, we are including the entire population. Yes or no? Entire population. For example, I want to check, it's a simple example, I want to check average marks for this student, for this class. Average marks, okay? So rather than taking average of all the 50 students, I take average of only 10 students because I am thinking that average of 10 students will represent the average of 50 students. Now, if my objective is to get the average marks of this class, which one is better? Getting average of 50 students or getting average of 10 students? Average of 50 students. So in that ground, we might think that census will generate more accurate result because we are serving our entire population. However, as he rightly mentioned that sometimes it's possible that when you are going for a huge population, I mean size of the population is very big, in that case you will have to employ a lot of people for collecting data, tabulating data. So there is a chance that there is interviewer mistakes, there is mistakes in collecting data, there is mistakes in tabulating data. However, if you go for sample, as you said that you can choose your sample, you can have small number of very trained people and they can be very closely supervised by the researcher. As a result, sample may generate more accurate result than a census. Anyway, we will be discussing more about this. So, as my question was why we go for sample rather than a census, so we got some point. One is, one of you said that it will be cost effective, it might generate more accurate result, so probably time is another issue, isn't it? Time is another issue because for census you need more time. Any other point? Okay. These are like more formal points that we have already tried to discuss. First of all is budget and time constraint that we already discussed. That we go for sample because we have limited resources and limited time. Limited access to total population. Look, sometimes it's possible that you are not constrained by time and resources, but still you go for sampling because you don't have access to the entire population. Okay, let's take an example that Ford Motor Corporation is trying to get a response from its past customer regarding the company's call of a defective model. Okay, you know, sometimes car manufacturers, they call back their defective models. So Ford is going to take response from its past customers that how do they feel about this company's calls of a defective model. Now the past customer, it's very easy to say past customers, but you understand that Ford will not be able to access all the past customers because probably some of them have changed their address, some of them have probably left country, some of them did not have updated their contact details. So even if they are not constrained by probably time and resources, but still they need to go for sampling because they do not have the information about entire population. Okay? Accurate and reliable result that I already mentioned, that it's possible that population, although apparently we believe that the entire population surveying will provide more accurate result, but may not because of the problems I said, interviewer skills, lack of interviewer skills, mistakes associated with data collection and tabulation. That's why sampling might generate more accurate result because of more trained people, more close supervision. The last point is destruction of test units. You know, particularly with regard to quality control test, you know, there are some quality control experiments or quality control tests. In this type of experiments or this type of tests, if we go for population, I mean if we go for census, what happens? Like, you know, that sometimes there is an opportunity of wine testing offered by, like, you know, we have Hunter Valley, 1 hour drive from here. Very commonly, the wineries, they offer people the opportunity for wine testing. So, you know, in wine testing, what generally happens is people take a test of very small amount of wines of different brands or so. Now, if that's a sampling, isn't it? If they go for census, what will happen?
They'll get very drunk.
Nothing will left, isn't it? Let's take an example of a company that produces firecrackers. Firecrackers. What they want to test is a certain standard of firecrackers. So they randomly pick up some of them and test. Now, if they want to check whether each of the firecrackers met a certain standard, so what they have to do? Ignite all of them, and nothing will left. Okay. So sometimes our type of experiments or type of tests are such that we will have to go for sampling because we cannot afford to go for census. So these are the reasons why we need to go for sampling. So the stages in selecting a sample, you can see it's a long process. So first of all, we need to start with targeting. We need to define the target population, then sampling frame, then determine whether we'll be going for a probability or non-probability sampling, then sample size, sampling units, conduct field work, and so many. So a lot of stages are there. We will briefly discuss some of them today. So first of all is defining target population. So first of all, very clearly, you need to define your target population. That means whom you will ask your questions. Once again, apparently we may think that defining a target population is simple because we know, well, like which group of people or which group of respondents we will be surveying. Like there will be customers, there will be consumers, there will be managers, there will be students, there will be households, and so on. Probably we think that it's very simple, but actually it may not. Okay? It may not. Now, let's take a very simple example. We want to survey student satisfaction of Newcastle University. Student satisfaction of Newcastle University. What will be your target population? How satisfied Newcastle University's students are?
Is this a trick question? Is this a trick question? current students, I guess, if the student is enrolled.
Okay. Current students, enrolled students. Okay. Anybody else with any other? So you are not at all interested about the past student.
You're the one setting the rules here. So if we want current students, then I guess any person who is currently enrolled in a course at the University of Newcastle makes them a current student.
No, what I'm asking is, what about the past student? You won't include any past students?
So wasn't your question about current students?
No, I was just asking that you will examine or you will investigate how satisfied Newcastle University's students are. Now, there might be current student, might be past student, or might be even those who are thinking about enrolling because they have some association with the university. Maybe you know we have probably a college, Newcastle International College or something, that they actually get some progressive way to get enrolled in Newcastle University. Okay, so what do you think? Current student, currently enrolled, past?
You'd want all of it. Anyone that enrolled, anyone that acquired.
Okay.
Past students, depends on how far back you want to go and what your scale is.
Okay, so past student, again now you need to decide that how past they are. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Well, you understand that still when I say that we will be surveying Newcastle University students, at a first glance, probably we thought, oh, it's very simple, those who are enrolled. But as we dig deeper, we find that it's not that simple. Probably we also should include our past students. Now, if we say past students, what do we mean by this? Should we include someone who passed out like maybe 20 years ago?
I'd say 5 years.
5 years. So we need to decide. We need to decide. Okay. Yes, I give you some examples.
You haven't told us what the problem is we're trying to solve here.
Okay, I didn't want to complicate the issue. I just said that we will measure student satisfaction. Okay, so how satisfied the students are. Once a survey was done to examine organizations' buying behavior. Organizations' buying behavior, okay? It's not individual buying behavior. And what do you think? Who should be your target population if you're going to investigate organizations' buying behavior?
Purchasing officers.
Purchasing officers, so purchase officers, okay. Actually, that was actually done, a survey was done, and the population, I mean, sample included the purchase officer or procurement officer. But later, it was found that like industrial engineers or the engineers, those who are working in the organizations, although do not have very direct contact with the purchase officer, but they play a very important role in organizations' buying behavior. Okay, so probably purchase officer was not a very good target population because purchase officers simply carry out the decisions taken by some superiors. So if you want to actually examine organizations' buying behavior, probably your population should include even some people with some superior designations rather than only the purchase officer. And probably I gave this example earlier that let's say a baby food manufacturer. I gave this example earlier, right? Baby food manufacturer wants to do some survey. Who do you think will be your population? Mothers, okay? Anybody else?
Carers or is it childcare centers, carers?
Carers, okay. Carers, I mean mothers and carers, you want to say?
Yeah, well, carers can also be like daycare centers and things like
Daycare centers, okay. Anybody else with any other? Okay. If I ask you that when you say mothers, what do you mean by mothers?
Can be adopted mothers, can be biological mothers, or maybe some sort of a club where they joined, or
Okay.
a mother's club, or
someone who has a child in their care,
Yeah.
that age group.
Okay. What about potential mother? Do you think they should be included?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. Okay. This example is available in your textbook. You can go through that. They have brought out a very, very nice story. So you understand that when we say mother, still it's not that easy to say what do you mean by mothers. Okay. So you need to very clearly define what do you mean by mothers. Okay. So once we define what our target population is, next we need to define our sampling frame. We call sampling frame. Sampling frame means actually the list, a list from which the actual sampling unit will be picked up. Okay? Once again, sampling frame is a list that we can get conveniently sometimes, and sometimes we cannot, from where we will actually pick up our respondents. Okay. Now, what the sampling frame can be. Look, as you said that, like for Newcastle University example, you said that current students. So what will be your sampling frame? I mean, how will you actually pick up, say, 500 students? From where you will get these 500 students? Database, good. Database means, can you be a bit more specific?
Sure, because I'm an engineering. It's basically where all that information is held.
No, I'm just asking you any particular element you're talking about?
Well, again, going back to what we were saying before, whether it's current students or whether you're looking for a particular, you narrow it down to keywords.
Do you mean like name?
Yes, that is. Like,
Email address?
is it you are talking about the students' IDs or maybe email address, something like that. So that is actually sampling frame that we are talking about. Sampling frame is something from where you will actually pick up your respondents. Now, it could be like telephone directory, it could be a directory of email address, it could be a car registration database. So anything, that's a sampling frame. So once you decide that this is my target population, the next you need to decide your sampling frame, because unless you have a very, very clear sampling frame, that we call working population as well, unless you have a very clear sampling frame, you may not be able to actually pick up your sample. Okay. For example, when we say mothers, so how do we actually get them? We need to find them out. We need to find them out. Now, how can we get them? Then if we want to survey mothers or carers, for example, others said carers, so how can we actually get them? By the hospitals. Okay, probably a list from the hospital. Yeah. So that will be a sampling frame. Okay. The next point I want to discuss is when we move from our target population to sampling frame. You understand that sampling frame is a more clear definition of our target population. Okay, that's why we call it working population. Now, when we go for sampling frame from our population, we actually incur or arise an error that we call sampling frame error. Okay, sampling frame error. What is this? So when we go for a sampling frame, we automatically exclude some sampling elements. Those are not covered in the sampling frame. You get my point? Again, I say, when we go for sampling frame, we automatically exclude some sampling elements. Those are not covered in the sampling frame. For example, when we say students from Newcastle University, and probably our sampling frame is the list of email IDs, email addresses, probably we are excluding some respondents who do not have an active email ID. For example, you are having issues with your enrollment, like your email is not activated yet, so probably we will lose you. Okay. It's possible that some students, they have email addresses, I mean university email addresses, but they are not using, they are just simply using some private email address. So probably we won't be able to reach them. Okay, So this is sampling frame error. As we go for sampling frame, we exclude some of our sampling elements. Even if like if you go for car registration or telephone directory, we simply exclude some of our potential sampling elements. Now, sampling unit. Sampling unit, as we already discussed, that sampling unit actually is an individual element in the sample. Okay? For example, your sample includes 500 respondents. Now, each of these respondents is your sampling unit. Okay? Now you can see like primary sampling unit, secondary sampling unit, tertiary sampling unit. What are these? If I be simple, to pick up individual sampling unit, sometimes we follow multiple steps. Like we go for first stage sampling, second stage sampling, third stage sampling, then we actually pick up our individual respondents. Okay? If I give you an example, let's say that you will survey some airline passengers about how satisfied they are with the airline services. Again, I say, you will survey some airline passengers about their satisfaction, okay? About their satisfaction of the airline services. Now, how can you choose individual respondents? Survey of? Physically in the airplane. Okay. Then the next question is, how will you pick up a particular, probably a flight, or a particular airlines, or a particular flight in a particular day? How will you pick them up? That's involved in
maybe
decision.
within the organization, they'll put the staff of each flight, maybe like, for example, American Airlines, if they have to do a survey on that day.
Okay.
All the flights.
So that's what I'm trying to say is, probably you cannot straight away pick up some passengers. Why? Because you cannot go and ask someone, oh, did you travel like maybe last 1 year? And can you fill up a questionnaire? You can't do that. So you need to follow a process. Probably first, as a primary sampling unit, probably you may choose a particular airlines first, that you will be surveying Qantas. That can be a primary sampling unit. Then the next sampling unit could be, okay, while the airline has been selected, now you may pick up a particular route, probably Sydney to London. Once you pick, okay, that's my particular route, that may be secondary sampling unit, that Sydney to London. The next question can be, okay, can we pick up any particular flight on a day? That means, are you talking about a weekday flight or weekend flight? Are you talking about a morning flight or day flight? So pick up one, let's say a weekend flight. Then pick up one, say morning flight. Then as you initially say that you actually reach to your individual respondents. So the point I'm trying to say is, when we are going for selecting sampling units, we may not be able to straight away select a particular sampling unit in one step. We may need to follow certain steps. Although here we see the 3 steps like primary sampling unit, secondary sampling unit, tertiary sampling unit, it's not necessary that we will have 3 units. Sometimes it may have even less stages, sometimes it may have more stages, okay? So, as far as the research is concerned, you need to carefully explain how you pick up your individual respondent. That's very, very important. Because if you cannot very carefully explain how you pick up your individual respondents, then your research might not appear to be very reliable. Okay, I tell you one story. Like about 2 years back, one of our PhD students, he was from our education faculty. He came to me that he was like struggling with the sampling design and data collection process, because he was doing a survey among the students of 4 universities in Saudi Arabia, and one of these university was a female university, I mean all-female university. Male was not allowed to get in. Okay. Now, in his sampling design, he said that he actually followed random sampling. We will be discussing shortly. That means he actually randomly picked up the respondents. However, his supervisor was not convinced that since he was not being able to go to the university, how he ensured that it was a random sampling. So he couldn't explain properly that how the randomness was ensured. Actually, why I'm telling you this, whenever you write down your research proposal for this course or even for future, you need to be very transparent about your sampling design. Because as transparent, as elaborate you are in designing your sample and explaining your sample, more reliable your research will look like. Okay, so far we already talked about sampling frame error. As I said, that when we move from target population to sampling frame, we arise an error, that sampling frame error. Now we will be talking about 2 more errors. One is random sampling error, another is systematic sampling error. Random sampling error, or if we only say sampling error, as I told you it earlier, I gave you one example first, that if we want to get an average marks for this class, so instead of taking average of 50 students, if I take average of 10 students, which one is better? You say that taking average of 50 students is better. Why? Like, why taking average of 50 students is better than taking average of 10 students?
Average will be higher.
Hmm?
The average will be higher.
Average will be higher. In which case?
But if you take just 10, the average will be smaller. But if you take 50, there will be more numbers to calculate. I don't know.
My argument is that you will have ready access to to be able to conduct a census, and whether you conduct your research on the whole population or on a smaller subset, it's probably still going to take some time at the same time, because you're just talking small numbers anyway, and you can probably do it in an Excel spreadsheet, and it's a simple, whether you do 50 or whether you do 10, it's going to take at the same time. You've got ready access to the numbers.
No, actually I'm talking about accuracy. Like, if we go for all these 50 students and take their marks and take an average,
Then the whole population.
That's the whole population. And if my objective is to get the average marks of the students, that's definitely more accurate than taking average of 10 students and representing 50 students. So that means in that case, census is more accurate. Okay. So what I want to say is, when we go for sampling rather than a census, we actually incur an error. What's the error? Error is, since we are not examining our entire population, we are only going for a sample, there is a chance that our sample doesn't truly reflect our population. Yes or no?
Yes.
It's possible that you very carefully design your sample, but still your sample is not truly or very truthfully or very accurately representing your population. That we call random sampling error. Okay, random sampling error. What's the meaning of this? Random sampling error is when you take a sample and the results, there is a potential that the results of the sample and the results of the population might differ. Then the error that we get is called random sampling error. Okay? One point we need to realize that this random sampling error has an inverse relationship with the sample size. Sample's inverse relationship with the sample size. That means larger our sample size, lower will be our random sampling error. Try to understand the point. What is random sampling error? The chance or the probability or the potential that our sample does not truly reflect our population. That means our sample result and our population result differs. Okay, that's the error we're talking about. Now what I'm saying is it has got an inverse relationship with the sample size. So definitely, if I take the example once again, that average of 50 students and average of 10 students. Now there is a chance that 10 students average does not well reflect 50 students average. Now if we start increasing this number from 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 to 40, as we start increasing this number, then this average will more approaching to the population result. Yes or no? So that's what I'm trying to say, that random sampling error has a negative relationship with the sample size. We can reduce this error as we can take larger sample. And the next one is systematic sampling error. Although we call it systematic sampling error, but this error doesn't have anything to do with sampling, okay? This actually has a relationship with the way the research is actually done. So this systematic sampling error can arise if we go for census or if we go for sampling. In either case, the systematic sampling error occurs. I already discussed this. I already gave you some examples. So this systematic sampling error basically arises when your research process is faulty. Research process is faulty means maybe your interviewer is not very skilled. Maybe your data collection process is faulty. Maybe your tabulation is done mistakenly. Okay? So these are some examples of systematic sampling error. Even your questionnaire is written in such a way that there is a very high non-response bias. Okay, that means your respondents are not answering. So all these are examples of systematic sampling error. Again, I say this is not related to sampling. This is related to the way of doing the research. That means it's related to the design of the research. How you collect data, how you tabulate your data, how you analyze your data. If any mistake or any error is there, that we call systematic sampling error. Now, we talked about three types of error: sampling frame error, random sampling error, systematic sampling error. Combining these three errors, that means if we have all these three errors, sometimes it's possible the sample we get actually end up is a less than perfectly representative sample. Let me explain this point with this diagram. Look at this graph carefully. First of all, in the extreme left, you can see we have our target population. Okay? Target population, that means our entire potential respondents. Then from our target population, we move to sampling frame. Okay? From left to right, if we move, we have sampling frame. Now, what is in between target population and sampling frame? What is in between? Sampling frame error. Okay? You understand that when we have target population, from target population, as we move to sampling frame, we have this error, sampling frame error. Yes or no? Like if we take email database, some people do not have email address. If we take car registration number, some people are not registered. If we take telephone directory, some people maybe have hearing disability, so that they cannot take part in this phone survey. Okay? So from target population, as we move to sampling frame, we come up with this error, sampling frame error. Okay? Then from sampling frame error, we go to planned sample. What does it mean? Sampling frame error, for example, you take all the email IDs. Now, there are 20,000 email IDs. It's not possible that you will survey all these 20,000 people. So what you do is you plan a sample. From 20,000, you actually want to survey, let's say, 1,000 people. So that's your planned sample. So from 20,000, you pick up a sample of 1,000 people. So what you have? Random sampling error. Why random sampling error? Because you are not surveying your entire working population. You are surveying only a subset. Okay? So we have this random sampling error. Now, when you have your planned sample, it's not necessary that all the respondents from your planned sample will answer correctly. Okay? It's not necessary. Like your planned sample is 1,000, it's not necessary that all the 1,000 people will answer properly. So your actual sample even maybe less than that. That's your actual sample. So what is in between? We have non-response error. So you didn't forget that we started with this target population. We moved to sampling frame. We have sampling frame error. Then we moved to planned sample. We have random sampling error. Then we move to actual sample, and we have non-response error. So when we have all these three errors, sampling frame, random sampling error, and it's kept happening in the other lectures as well. Is everything back? Yeah. Okay. So when we have all these three types of error and we have a final workable sample, it's possible that this final sample, I mean the final actual sample, is less than perfectly representative one, the one we are actually looking for. So what we need to take all necessary steps so that we can keep this error to a minimum. Okay? Because as I already have said, that like random sampling error has a negative relationship with the sample size. So if we can increase our sample size, probably we can reduce our random sampling error. Non-response error, as you know, that it's related to like the way your questionnaire is designed, the way you collect data, the way you tabulate your data, so it's related to this. If you can engage more trained people and if you can have a more supervised environment, probably you can reduce these errors as well. So we need to take all necessary steps so that we can reduce these errors. As a result, our final workable sample can truly reflect our population. Okay. So now we will be discussing some sampling techniques or sampling procedures. Any question? Any problem up to this? Okay. Before I go to discuss this topic, I just say a few sentences about your assignment. You know, in your assignment there is one section called sample design. Sample design. So what I will be expecting that you first of all clearly write down your target population. Okay? Clearly write down your target population. As I already have said, that try to be very specific. Okay? Be specific. So don't say that like it's related to visa. Okay? So don't say that my target population is all customers. Okay? Don't say like this, because all customers, then I will keep asking, like, what do you mean by all customers? Are the current customers or past customers or what? Try to be specific. What do you mean by customers? Okay? Then once you have this target population, then try to write down what is your sampling frame. Okay? Sampling frame means if you say that, okay, my target population is Visa's customers, then what is your sampling frame? That means what database you are going to use to pick up your sample. Is it the like list of the card holders or list of email IDs or list of phone numbers or whatever? Okay. Now, once again, try to be more rational. Okay. Try to be more rational and try to be more practical. For example, if you say that my target population is Visa card holders and my sampling frame is the list of card holders, be mindful how you are going to get that. Okay, like how are you going to get this list of card holders? Because it's a sophisticated information. Okay, so be mindful how do you explain this. Okay, so clearly write down your target population, clearly write down your sampling frame. Okay, be specific, and the next point will be your sampling technique. Okay, sampling technique, that we will be discussing now. What is your sampling technique? That means Now we will be discussing a number of probability and non-probability sampling techniques, okay? Please note that under each of these classification, that means probability sampling and non-probability sampling, under each of these techniques, there are number of sampling techniques. That means under probability techniques, there are some, and under non-probability sampling, there are some techniques, okay? We will be discussing more specifically. So when you write down your sampling technique, my previous experience says that you be very casual and write down that we will be following a probability sampling technique. Actually, that doesn't make any sense, because probability, there are a number of probability sampling techniques. So if you say probability sampling technique, write down which one, okay? Which one, and just briefly write down why. Like different sampling techniques are there, so why you are choosing this particular sampling technique, okay? So I will be saying some more sentences about this once I finish discussing this probability and non-probability sampling. Okay. Now, broadly, our sampling techniques can be divided into these two categories: probability sampling technique and non-probability sampling technique. Okay. I be simple in explaining these two. In probability sampling technique, try to understand carefully. In probability sampling technique, we actually try to be random, okay? Try to be random. Try to be random means that each sampling unit has a known or equal chance of being selected, okay? So it's not perfectly random all the time, but we try to be random. We try to implement some degree of randomness so that each and every element of the sampling unit has a known or equal chance of being selected. That's a probability sampling. However, in non-probability sampling technique, actually we be judgmental or we be subjective in picking up our sample. You understand my point? In non-probability sampling, what we do, we pick up our sample on the basis of our judgment or on the basis of our experience. So it's a bit of arbitrary. Arbitrarily, we pick up some sampling units. So that's non-probability sampling. Now, first of all, we will be talking about non-probability sampling. Then we will be discussing some probability sampling technique. So broadly, as I already have said, that non-probability sampling means we pick up our sample arbitrarily by being judgmental or on the basis of our experience. So first of all is convenience sampling. You know, like sometimes when we visit a supermarket or a shopping mall, sometimes we see that people are intercepting customers and asking some questions. Or intercepting customers, giving a short questionnaire and asking that, can you answer this? So this type of sampling is called convenience sampling. Okay? Why do we call it convenience sampling? Because in this sampling, the sampling units are picked up because they are convenient to pick up. Because if you go to a shopping mall or a supermarket, pick up some customers and ask them, can you fill up this short survey? You are actually doing it because this is convenient to do. So that's called convenience sampling. Got my point? That's called convenience sampling. So what's the advantage of this? Can anyone tell me? What's the advantage of this type of sampling? Easy. Good. Easy. Cost effective. Good. Easy, cost effective. Probably even we can do it quickly. Okay. Saves time, you're right. What's the problem? Any problem? No problem? You want to say?
What I think is that sometimes you may not get the accurate data.
Excellent. May not get accurate data. So why? Why do you think we may not get accurate data?
You can always change your mind.
Well, change your mind can happen for the others as well.
Yeah.
Maybe one day you like one product and the other day you don't.
It's all right. That's a different story. Like if you change your mind, that can happen for other sampling technique as well. Anything else? You want to say anything? No? What's the problem?
I guess that the sample might not represent the whole population.
Excellent, excellent. You are being very biased in this type of sampling. Why? Because you are only picking up your respondents, those who are visiting probably a shopping malls, or those only visiting a particular supermarket. So that's the most important problem of this sampling is your sample may not represent your population, because that's pretty much biased, or that's pretty much restricted. Only those who are visiting a particular place, maybe particular bus station or train station or a shopping mall or so. Okay, the next one is judgment or purposive sampling. In this case, what happens is generally an experienced person or maybe an experienced researcher will pick up the sampling units just on the basis of judgment. On the basis of judgment. Let's say that we will be introducing a certain product all over Australia. Okay? A certain product all over Australia, and we want to do a test market. I think you didn't forget what a test market is. It's an experiment that we conduct in a real market situation. Okay? So if we want to introduce this product all over Australia and want to do a test market, let's say that we will pick up 3 cities to implement this test market. Now, we employ an experienced researcher and ask him or her that can you pick up 3 cities for us to implement this test market. Because you understand you cannot do a test market entire Australia. You will pick up probably some cities and you do that. So this experienced researcher, on the basis of his or her experience, will pick up 3 cities where this test market should be done. Now what will be the main point of picking up these 3 cities? Probably the experienced researcher will try to pick up these cities that closely represent whole Australia. Yes or no? That will be the main point. So this type of sampling is called purposive sampling or judgmental sampling. You are picking up your sampling unit just on the basis of judgment. You are thinking, oh, that's right. That sampling will be right. Or that sampling unit will represent my population. So you just being judgmental, just being purposive in selecting. And next one is quota sampling. Let's say that you are doing a research on energy conservation. Okay? Energy conservation. And you want to include people from both urban areas and rural areas. Okay? Now, you understand that energy conservation behavior or attitude towards energy conservation will likely be different in the urban area and will likely be different in the rural areas. Okay? However, they will be pretty much similar among the rural people and among the urban people. Now, if you go for a sampling technique that doesn't take into consideration this factor, that means urban people and rural people, and urban people and rural people have different attitude or different behavior towards energy conservation, if you do not take into this account, probably your sampling will be a wrong one. So what you can do is, you may go for a quota sampling. So what's the meaning of quota sampling? What you do is, you first of all divide your whole population into 2 quota. One is, let's say, urban people, another is rural people. Okay? Then decide that within this urban group, how you will pick up your sampling units, and in this rural group, how will you pick up your sampling units? So you will have 2 subsamples. In your entire sample, you will have 2 subsamples. One is the urban, another is rural, and then you will analyze you will collect your data and analyze. This type of sampling is called quota sampling. Okay? So what we try to do is, we try to divide our whole sample into different subsamples. Because we want that these subsamples represent a particular characteristics of our population. Okay, as I say, that like in energy conservation, our population has two types of people, urban and rural people. So we want that our sample truly represent these urban and rural people. That's why we make two quota, and we select the people within this.
Is that what
Yes.
your PhD student did with the Saudi Arabia University project?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what he or she had to do? Was Quota Sample because of the all people in the university?
Yeah. So
Did they have to split their sampling groups into subunits? Because
it depends on like whether you think that students in different stages have any relation with your research objective or not. Okay, because the example that I was saying that like energy conservation, you are thinking that these two geographic locations will have impact, how they actually behave or how they have their actual attitude towards energy conservation. Now, if you think that that's not the case, then you don't need to go for quota sampling. Okay, like as I was saying that student satisfaction. Now, if you think that when we are measuring student satisfaction, probably we take into account that whether these PhD students or undergrad students or master students, they have any relation to do with the satisfaction, or probably we should take this factor into account, then we may go for quota sampling. I just refer to your textbook. In this case, I'm sorry. In your textbook, there is a table that is table 16.9. In this table, it's actually a snapshot that is summarizing all the sampling techniques. Okay, you can see like description, convenience sampling, judgment sampling, quota sampling, snowball that we will be discussing shortly, and there are like cost and degree of use. There are advantages and disadvantages. Okay, I am not asking that you memorize all these like advantages, disadvantages, cost and degree of use. I'm not asking that you memorize all them, but I am just asking you that go through this table carefully and try to develop your understanding that why in general we go for this type of sampling and in general we go for this type of sampling. Okay, and as I was telling you a few moments back that in your assignment, when you write down that I will be using this sampling technique, then you can go through this table and you can try to find out what are the advantages of this particular sampling technique and like what's the superiority of this sampling technique related to the others. Okay, so that this table will give you a very clear idea about the different sampling techniques and the superiority of a particular one. So these will help you developing your understanding. At the same time, these will help you writing down your sampling design section in your assignment. Okay. Now, when you go for this non-probability sampling, we actually have some biases. Okay? Some biases. I already have mentioned what do we mean by bias. Bias means when we do not get the most likely result or when we do not get the most likely response. That's the sources of bias. So what are these? First of all, it's similar to interviewer. Okay, that's one source of bias. That's similar to interviewer. Do you understand this point? What do you mean by this?
The interviewer might favor respondents or responses that are of the same cultural background, for example, or might favor, so that's with regard to the respondents, or with regard to responses, might favour responses that align with the interviewer's position on the topic.
Okay, okay. Anybody else? What do you mean by this? Similar to interviewer, it's a source of bias. What do you mean by this?
Doesn't mean the samples you choose, maybe these two or these similar respondents, they have the similar characters, or they have the maybe the similar education or the similar, so maybe their choice is similar.
Similar? Similar to whom?
To your response.
Okay. You are right, you are right. What happens is, interviewer, like as we talked about earlier, the interviewer skills, okay, or interviewer mistakes, it's typically happen like when a survey is actually done, interviewer is given some degree of discretion that you choose your respondents by yourself, okay. Now, it's very likely that interviewer will try to interview those people who is similar to interviewer.
Work ethic.
Hmm?
To his work ethic.
Yes.
Maybe he's very set in his ways and he's not willing to open up to challenge.
It's right, but for example, like an interviewer has an age of, let's say, 25 years. Okay? Now, when interviewer goes to interview, probably will try to choose young people like him or her. Or if interviewer is a student of a university, so probably the interviewer will first try to survey the students around him or her. Yes or no? So it's a sort of bias, because when we are surveying, we try to survey people around us, because we have some sort of commonness among us. Okay? This is one. Another is easily found. What do you mean by this? Easily found. It's very simple. Like sometimes what we do, we go to in a place where the people are very widely available, like maybe a shopping center, maybe a shopping mall, or maybe a bus station, or maybe a very crowded road, because we know that people are easily found here. Willing to be interviewed. It's pretty simple, because we cannot interview someone who is not willing to be interviewed. Yes or no? Okay. So actually, we exclude people who do not willing to be interviewed. Last of all is middle class. Any idea what is this?
Well, they can have a big opinion about everything because they have wider access to economical, what can I say? The economic structure is bigger, so they've got more experience, more access to information, perhaps more.
Okay, so what's a bias actually?
Who have the ability to buy your products.
Hmm?
The people who have the ability to buy your products. So the middle class, maybe they have the ability to buy the products. Or,
Hmm. Hmm.
and represent the whole level.
Okay.
So the middle class might be more educated, for example, and particularly when it comes to free-form responses, they'll have more to say about those than maybe someone with a lesser educational qualification. And indeed, those with a lesser educational qualification may be reluctant to answer those
Good.
sort of free-form responses.
So typically, our samples are overrepresented by middle class, isn't it? Now, like once again, if you go through your textbook, you will find a story that once an interviewer was doing a face-to-face interview. So he was like knocking at the door when someone was appearing on the door, was asking some questions. Now, in doing so, suddenly he reached in a neighborhood where there was like very big mansions, very high boundary walls, there were security guards, and so on. The interviewer actually felt uncomfortable because he thought that if I knock on the door, actually the person who will appear in the door is probably someone hired, not the person, not the actual respondent the interviewer is looking for. So he simply escaped from this neighborhood and went to some nearing neighborhood where he felt comfortable that there was not so big mansions and so on. Okay. So definitely, as all of you have said, that typically our samples are overrepresented by middle class. So we exclude probably upper class because we have less ability to get them. and we also probably exclude lower class because they are not like maybe able to fill up our surveys or so. But we need to understand that if our research is such that we need to include these different classes of people, we need to ensure that no particular class overrepresent our sample. This is another sampling technique, snowball sampling. This sampling technique is particularly applicable in a situation where we find it very difficult to get our sample search. Okay, that means our research is such and our respondents is such that it's very difficult to get the required number of respondents. That's why what we do, if we go for snowball sampling, what we actually do is we initially get a sample, we survey them, and get responses from this initial sample to find out some additional respondents. Do you understand my point? That means we survey our initial sample and we try to collect information from this initial sample to find out some additional respondents. Okay? Is it all right? For example, let's say that you will survey some professional golf players. Okay? Professional golf players. Now you understand that professional golf player is not an easy to find element. So what you can do is you can go for a snowball sampling. So what you will do in snowball sampling, let's say you go to a golf club, get a list of golf players, maybe 15 or 10 golf players. So first survey them. Survey these 10 or 15 people. Then ask them that whether they can recommend somebody else who we can survey. Do you understand my point? That means you are surveying one golf players of a particular club and you ask them, can you recommend someone like you, that like another golf player we can survey? So try to collect information from your initial sample so that you can reach to some additional sampling elements. That's snowball sampling. Is it all right? Do you find any problem with this sampling technique? You want to say anything? Okay. Any problem? Yes?
I think it will also be biased because the golf player will recommend to his friends or people from his year.
Excellent point, excellent point. Yes, that will be biased because you have an initial sample and you are collecting information from them to find additional sampling elements. So definitely someone will recommend additional elements who will be like similar to your initial sample, or maybe friend, or maybe the players in the same club. So that will be a bias. That will be a biased sample. Okay?
Is it illegal to ask for personal information?
Not necessary. You can ask. It's not personal information. You are simply asking that, do you think that somebody like you will be willing to take part in the survey? Now, if that person doesn't want to give this information, then it's fine. Okay. Now, another point is like the person who is giving the details of another probably may ask that person that, am I allowed to give you contact details or so. It's might be some issue, but you need to handle that one.
I think the more difficult part would be getting the list from the golf club in the first place. That would be the more difficult part, unless your research was affiliated with the or being conducted for that.
Well, that might be an issue, as I said about your assignment. That like it's my previous experience that sometimes we very easily write that we will get the card holders list, or we will get the players list, or we will get the customers list. Be rational that how you will get that.
Wouldn't that like an infringement of privacy?
Well, it's difficult to say that, like what information you want and how you utilize this information. Probably like looking for an email address, it doesn't violate privacy issue, does it?
Unless people already say that they give permission that information be given out.
That is, like sometimes, you know, when we give our email address, there is an option that do you allow us to give your email address to some other. So if that's the case, then it's not a violation of the privacy. But if not, then probably. Like, you know, in Australia, PhD students, those who need to do this type of surveys, they have to complete a document. It's called ethics application. Ethics application, and sometimes it's so difficult to get this ethics approval, and it's so time-consuming process. Sometimes like half of the PhD duration goes away getting this ethics approval. Like the way you were asking, isn't it a privacy issue? Isn't it the infringement of privacy? Like how will you get this survey? How will you get this list? How will you use this information? Isn't it illegal to asking for this information? So the same questions will be asked. If, let's say, you are doing your PhD and you have written your research proposal and you send it for your ethics approval, the similar questions will be asked by your ethics committee. That, can you really ask this question? Is it legal? Is it a violation of the policy or not? I remember that one of my friends, he was doing PhD, and he had so much difficulties getting this ethics approval, and his supervisor once said that you should get a PhD on how to get an ethics approval because he had so much difficulty getting this approval. And even when they give this ethics approval, they also want to be very sure that how will you use this information, how will you store this information, and once it's over, how will you even destroy this information? You need to very clearly write down all of these, and you need to make them convinced. Okay, so far we are talking about non-probability sampling, as we discussed that convenience sampling, judgmental sampling, quota sampling, and snowball sampling. So those are non-probability sampling in general. Okay, in general, non-probability sampling. Now we will be talking about probability sampling. As I said that in probability sampling, what we try to do, we try to implement some degree of randomness, as I said. Okay, some degree of randomness. That means we try that our sample elements get some chance of being selected. Okay, so we will be talking about simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, and probably one more after this slide. So first of all is the simple random sampling. Most common and most widely used one is simple random sampling. In simple random sampling, what we actually do is each and every element gets an equal chance of being selected when we implement the simple random sampling. You know that's like how the lottery is picked up. Let's say you have filled up a particular survey and there is a counterpart. You just cheer it and put it in a basket, and there are hundreds. So it's like you steer them very well and pick up few of them. So that's random sampling. That means you ensure that each and every element of your sampling unit gets equal chance of being selected. You do not be biased or purposive or judgmental. It's a mathematically, you provide each of them an equal chance. Okay? One relevant point I tell you here that when you write down that this is the sampling technique I will be following, please briefly write down how will you do that. Okay? How will you do that? For example, if you say that I will use simple random sampling, okay? As I said that you will ensure that each and every element gets an equal chance. How will you do that? You need to write it down. As I told you a story about that Saudi Arabian student, that he said that he ensured random sampling, but supervisor was not convinced. You weren't there. How did you ensure this randomness? So even in your assignment, if you write down, like you will be choosing your customers using simple random sampling, you need to write down how will you do that. Okay? Any idea? How can you like ensure simple random sampling? For any sample, let's say you have like a large population and you want to pick up some of them by using a simple random sampling. How will you do that? Okay, let's be more specific. As the Newcastle University student example was given, let's say there are 40,000 enrolled students at this moment. 40,000 enrolled students. You will pick up 1,000 from 40,000, and you will use simple random sampling. How will you do that? Any idea?
Allocate each record that you have for each student a number from 1 to 40,000.
Okay.
And separately generate a random list of numbers between 1 and 40,000.
Okay. That's a very good point. Very good point. So nowadays, you have different computer softwares for generating random numbers. Okay. So if you have listened to what he said, is like you have 40,000 students, and you have like 40,000 email address, for example. So assign one number for each of them, like 1 to 40,000. Okay? That means if you assign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then it will be 1 to 40,000. So now you have 40,000 numbers. You need to pick up 1,000. Okay? So you need to randomly pick up 1,000 from this 40,000. Here you can use some softwares. There are some softwares. So if you put your smallest number and the largest number, for example, 1 in 40,000, and if you command that, can you generate 1,000 random numbers? So it will generate 1,000 random numbers between 1 to 40,000. Then by these random numbers, pick up the 1,000 from 40,000. So this is one way you can use the simple random sampling. Systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is basically, although it's discussed under probability sampling, but it's basically a combination of probability and non-probability sampling. So what we actually do under this case, we have a starting point of our database, a starting point. This starting point is selected on a probability basis. Okay? And once we have this starting point, then every nth observation is taken as our sample. Okay, every nth observation means what? Once again, like as I said, that you have 40,000 enrolled students and you will pick up 1,000. So what does it mean? It means that from 40,000, if you want to pick up 1,000, that means you will pick 1 from every 40. Yes or no? 1 from every 40. So if you go for systematic sampling, what you need to do, you need to randomly choose any number from 1 to 40. Randomly choose any number from 1 to 40. Let's say 10. Okay? 10. That's randomly comes up, 10. Then from 10, you choose every 40th number. Do you get my point? 10. Then if you add 40, then you actually will pick up 50th, then 90th, then 130. Then in this way, pick up every 40th observation so that you will get 1,000 out of 40,000. Do you understand my point or not? So you randomly, you understand that it's not perfectly random. Why not perfectly random? Because you only randomly choose your starting point, but then you choose every nth observation, so it's not perfectly random. But if you randomly choose your starting point, it will provide you a result very similar to your random sampling. The next one is stratified sampling. The stratified sampling is close to or similar to quota sampling. Okay? Quota sampling. One difference is in quota sampling, the individual sampling element within each quota is selected on a non-probability basis. Don't forget, the quota sampling that we discussed is a non-probability sampling technique. Okay? So under each quota, individual sampling units are selected on a non-probability basis. But in stratified sampling, what we do is, first of all, we will have an entire population. We will divide it into different stratum. Okay? Different stratum. For example, this income level, this income level, this income level. Or this geographic location, this geographic location, this geographic location. So we will divide our population into different stratum. Now, under each stratum, we will pick up sampling elements on a probability basis. For example, simple random sampling. Okay? Again I said, like you have a total population, you first divide them into different stratum, like income group 1, income group 2, income group 3, or age group 1, age group 2, age group 3, or a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, and something other engineer. Okay, so you have 3 different strata. Now under each stratum you pick up individual element by simple random sampling. Okay, so the main difference between quota sampling and stratified sampling is, in quota sampling, individual sampling element under each quota is collected on a non-probability basis, but here individual sampling element under each stratum is selected on a probability basis. Okay. By the way, why we may go for this stratified sampling? Actually, you understand that if we go for simple random sampling, like we randomly pick up a particular sample size. Now, it's possible that even if we go for this random sampling, probably a particular subsample will be overrepresented in our total sample. Okay, for example, let's say your research is such that it's very important that your sample is equally represented by male and females. Okay, your research issue is such that it should be equally represented by male and female. If you go for simple random sampling, it's possible that your sample may be overrepresented by male or you overrepresented by female. So what you can simply do is first divide them into 2 strata, male and female. Then under male, pick up some sampling elements, under female, pick up some sampling elements, so that you can ensure that no one is overrepresented or no one is underrepresented. So that's the main issue. Then proportional stratified sampling and disproportional stratified sampling. I already have said that in quota sampling or stratified sampling, what you try to do is you divide your entire population into different subsamples in a way that your subsamples represent a particular characteristics of your population. Okay? Particular characteristics of your population. Now, proportional stratified sampling, that means if you go for a stratified sampling that's proportional, it means that individual sampling elements under each stratum is selected in such a way so that its proportion in the entire sample is consistent with its proportion in the entire population. Okay, it's not difficult. Probably I told you a long sentence. That's why it seems to be difficult. If we go for proportional stratified sampling, then we select individual sampling unit under each stratum in such a way so that the proportion of each stratum in our sample represent the proportion of each stratum in the entire population. Okay, let me give you a simple example. In your total population, male and female's ratio is 50-50. Okay, male 50, female 50. That's the characteristics of your population. Now you go for proportional stratified sampling so that your sample also has 50% male and 50% female. That is proportional stratified sampling. That means each stratum in your sample represents the same characteristic as of the population. Is my point clear? However, disproportional stratified sampling is each stratum, sampling units in each stratum selected in such a way that this proportion is not consistent with that of the population. Okay? For example, as I said, that in your population, the male-female ratio is 50-50. You go for a stratified sampling, but the stratum of male and female represent 60-40. Your actual population is 50-50, but your sample shows 60-40. That's disproportional stratified sampling. Okay? So the point I'm trying to say that it's not necessary that when you go for a stratified sampling, it's not necessary that the proportion of each stratum is always be consistent with that of the population. It's not necessary. Okay? It actually depends on sometimes your research objective and sometimes your convenience. Now you can say, well, why we may go for disproportional stratified sampling? As I already have said, that Let's say that your population is such that there are 50-50 male and female, but in your sample it is 60-40. Why do you think we may go for this disproportional stratified sampling? Because that's not representing our population. Okay, let me show you an example. Probably you will be able to answer my question. Look, in this case, we are actually surveying some businesses, some stores. We have three types of stores. You can see one is warehouse, clubs, then chain stores, and finally we have the small independent stores. These are the three types of stores. Now, in our entire population, the proportions are like this: 20%, 57%, and 23%. That means 20% warehouse clubs, 57% chain stores, and 23% is small independents. So that's the actual population. Okay? Actual population. Now, if you go for stratified sampling in such a way that these ratios are maintained in your sample, like you pick up 20% warehouse clubs, 57% chain stores, and 23% small independents, then it is proportional stratified sampling. Is it okay? However, if you pick up your samples in such a way that this ratio is not maintained, for example, your warehouse clubs, basically in your sample, your warehouse clubs is 50% and chain stores are 38% and small independents are 12%. If that's the case, then it is disproportional stratified sampling. Okay? Can you tell me now, what may be the reasons we may go for disproportional sampling, disproportional stratified sampling, although it does not represent the population in the absolute sense? Any idea?
The area of research is more specific to the warehouse clubs as opposed to the other two?
Well, if it is more it's specific to warehouse clubs, then probably why do we include chain stores and small independents? Broader. Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Maybe the priorities. For example, if you want to attract warehouse clubs, in this case from overseas, and want to change your taxes, you have to consider the other businesses as well. But your main focus is on the one specific group.
Okay. Anybody else with any other point? Like why we may choose to go for a disproportional sampling? Well, the first and the most simplest point is convenience. Okay. Sometimes you may think that collecting information from a particular stratum is more convenient. That's why you collect more information from that stratum. Okay. As I said that, like male and female, in the actual population, the ratio is 50-50, but in your sample it's 60-40 because you are thinking that you have more easy access to male respondents than you have access to female respondents. So you have more male respondents than female respondents because of your convenience. Like urban and rural, although there is a certain ratio in your actual population, but in your sample you have more urban people compared to rural people because you think that it's easier to get access to urban people compared to rural people. This is one point. Convenience. The second point is now you need to look at what is your research objective, and what data you actually is dealing with. Okay, in this case, look, we have warehouse clubs, that's 20%. Like in terms of number, if you look, that we have, let's say we have 100 respondents. There are 20 warehouse clubs, 57 chain stores, and 23 small independents. Okay, these are numbers. Now, if you're thinking of cells, like if your data is cells, Now look, although our warehouse is only 20 out of 100, but probably that covers even about 50% of the entire sample, because warehouse clubs sales revenue is much, much higher than chain stores and small independents. Is it okay? So this disproportional sample apparently look disproportional in terms of number, but in terms of your actual data you are using, probably this is more practical or more representative of your population. Okay? So it's important that you look at your actual data you are working with, and also the purpose or the particular research issue you are dealing with. Cluster sampling. Well, it's nothing different actually. It's related to what we have already discussed. If you can remember, as I said earlier, that when we pick up our actual sampling element, it's not necessary that the final respondent is picked up in one stage. Sometimes we need to follow different stages to actually reach to our respondents. Now, cluster sampling is a particular sampling technique where the primary sampling unit is a cluster of respondents rather than a final individual respondent. Okay? Again I say, in cluster sampling, the primary sampling unit that you select is a cluster of our respondents rather than our final respondent. Okay? So what do you mean by cluster of respondents? That means you pick up probably a geographic location, or you pick up probably a particular university, or you pick up probably a particular shopping mall where you will survey people. You pick up a particular neighborhood, a particular suburb, and you will survey the people surrounding them. Okay? So this is cluster sampling. So what you actually do is, rather than picking up your individual respondents, you pick up a cluster, and then you survey people within that cluster, within the university, within the geographic area, within the shopping mall, like this. Multi-stage area sampling. This type of sampling technique is particularly applicable when you are dealing with a geographic sampling. Okay, geographic sampling. So when we follow this multi-stage area sampling, what we basically do is we follow different stages of sampling, and we progressively try to reach to a more smaller geographic location or more smaller geographic unit so that we can reach to our respondents. Again I say, we use different stages of sampling so that we can progressively reach to a more smaller geographic location to get our respondents. Okay. Once again, I show you an example from your textbook. This is an example of multi-stage area sampling. Okay. So as I said, that you will be following different stage of sampling. So you progressively come up with a more smaller geographic location. First of all, at the top extreme left, I think you understand which country is this. At the top left, which country is this? Okay. Few days back, I was reading an interesting news that there was a survey in United States among 4,000 university students. 4,000 university students in United States were surveyed. They were given a map without mentioning any country name or any geographic name, and they were asked to put a dot where they think North Korea is. Okay. And then all these responses were summarized in a world map. And interestingly, there were a lot of dots in Australia as well. Okay. So you understand what I'm trying to say? So a lot of US people think that Australia is where the North Korea is located. Anyway, so this is the United States. So in multi-stage area sampling, so what you are first of all trying to do from this whole country, probably you will, first of all, you will select a city. Okay? For example, you can see from this country, we go, if you go to right, we first of all select the primary area, that's a city. A particular city. In Australia, probably, let's say Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide or whatsoever. So a particular city. Then in the next stage, what we do is from this city, probably we pick up a particular suburb. So we are progressively reaching to a more smaller geographic location. So we pick up a particular suburb. And from this suburb, we go more closer, probably we pick up some particular locality or some particular roads. And within this locality, then we will be choosing some households, and finally we will be surveying them. Okay? So this type of sampling is called multi-stage area sampling. We progressively reach to our respondents. Oh. Okay, so far we discussed a number of sampling techniques. Once again, I just remind you that in your assignment, you need to clearly write down what sampling technique you will be following. Simple random sampling, cluster sampling, snowball sampling, whatever. Okay, briefly write down why. And when you are writing down why, try to put some advantages. And also, it will be better if you can cite some articles, some relevant articles that says that this is a suitable sampling technique in this circumstance. And as I also have said, you need to write down that how will you do that. I mean, if you are following a particular sampling technique, how will you implement that? Just take the example of multi-stage area sampling, I said. Like if you say that I will be following multi-stage area sampling, okay? Try to explain the way I have explained. Okay, what did I say? First of all, take the whole country. Then select a particular city. Be specific. Then I will select this city. Then I will select this suburb. Then these roads. Then these many houses within these roads. Okay? So you need to explain very clearly that how you will reach to your individual respondents. Okay. So the next topic we are discussing is what's the appropriate sample design. Okay. So now the question is, which one is our appropriate sampling design? What sampling technique is appropriate? You understand that there is no direct answer to this question, because if we could say that this is appropriate, then we need not to discuss so many techniques. Okay. So we need to consider some points that will dictate us to choose a particular sampling technique. First of all is degree of accuracy. Degree of accuracy means, as a researcher, how much tolerant you are to the random error. Okay? How much tolerant you are. Or what's the degree of accuracy you want. If you want a high degree of accuracy, probably you will choose one sampling technique, and if you do not want high degree of accuracy, or if you have high tolerance to error, probably you will choose a different sampling technique. Is this point clear or not? Look, what I'm saying is, I said that if you want high degree of accuracy, then you will choose one particular technique. Now you can say, well, who will not want accuracy? Everybody will want accuracy. Actually, you know, how much accuracy you want, that also depends on what type of research you are doing and which stage of research you are. You can remember we learned about exploratory research, causal research, descriptive research earlier. Can you remember? Mm-hmm. In exploratory research, we discussed that exploratory research is an early stage research, and that's basically aims to clarify the ambiguous situation. Can you remember that? Okay, if you can remember that, now if you are doing an exploratory type of research, will you require very high degree of accuracy in terms of your sampling? You won't, because your primary objective of exploratory research is to clarify your ambiguous situation, so you don't need a very big sample and you don't need to be very much accurate. But if you are in the later stage of research, probably you should be using some probability sampling, for example, simple random sample or systematic sampling, because you need to be more accurate. But when you are in the early stage of your research, for example, exploratory research, you don't need to be that much accurate, so probably you can go for some non-probability sampling like judgmental sampling or convenience sampling. You understand the point, the degree of accuracy? Okay, then resources. Resources and time, those are actually issues in all the cases. First of all is resources. Which sampling technique you will be following, that also depends on your resources and also on your time. For example, if you do not have resource constraints, probably you can go for some technique that are expensive. For example, simple random sampling, or systematic sampling, or stratified sampling. There you will have to choose a large sample, and that will be expensive. However, if you have resource constraints, probably you can go for like convenience sampling. You don't need to do, you can remember we discussed earlier that convenience sampling is cost effective, or judgmental sampling. So you go for a small sample because you have the resources and time constraints. Then advanced knowledge of the population. Look, what sampling technique you use, that may be determined by how much knowledge you have relating to your population. Okay? Can you remember I discussed about quota sampling, about stratified sampling. I said that first of all what you do is you divide your entire population into different stratum or different quota, and then collect your individual sampling technique in each of these strata. Okay? So what does it mean? It means that to implement this type of sampling technique, you need to have good knowledge about your population. Yes or no? Like as I said, that urban, rural people, income group, different age group, or different educational background, or different professional background. Now, if you do not have knowledge, this knowledge about your population, you cannot implement this type of sampling technique like stratified or quota sampling, you cannot implement. So, to choose a particular sampling technique, you also need to know that how much information you have about your population, how much you know about your population. National versus local project. So what is the extent or how big your project is, how big your research project is. For example, let's say you are doing your master's and you will be doing a master's thesis. Now, will it be suitable to carry on a nationwide project or a nationwide survey when you are doing a master's thesis? That will not, because when you are a student, it will not be possible for you, probably it will not be possible for you to do a nationwide survey. So in that case, probably you need to go for a local survey. So when you go for a local survey, multi-stage area sampling, type of sampling technique definitely is not suitable. Okay, so these are the points we need to consider when we are picking up our particular sampling technique. Just last few sentences about this internet sampling. You know, nowadays this internet sampling is very common. Like what we do is we go to internet survey and select an internet sample, and internet users basically answer the surveys. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages both for internet sampling, isn't it? So can anyone tell me any of the advantages for using internet sampling?
Quick response. Quick response.
Quick response, okay. Probably your required sample size may be met within a couple of days, or within even maybe a day. Okay, so you can quickly finish your survey. That's a good point. Anything else? Hmm? Cheap. Okay. Cheap. Maybe. Anything else? Okay. Any disadvantage?
Only those people have access to internet.
Okay. So only you will get the respondents, those have internet or those use computer.
On that specific site.
Hmm? Or a particular specific site. Okay, that's good. So you are restricting your sample only to those who have access to this technology. Okay. Any other problem?
There is no control on the target, on the frame.
Okay. Okay. So actually, even you do not have control who your sample is. Sometimes, isn't it? Your sample becomes unrestricted. It's beyond your control. That's another good point. Anything else?
Does that include like the possibility of the age groups, for example? Like a lot of, there's a certain age that use the internet more so than anybody else, which I know is kind of the first point. But does that sort of cover under all of that as well?
That is. Yeah. Any other problem with the internet sample? Okay. Just with all these points, I want to add one additional point. That is, nowadays there are a lot of surveys in internet. So probably the person that is taking your survey or filling up your survey is very much interested about the topic, or probably the other extreme. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? What I'm trying to say is internet surveys probably will be responded by only two extremes. One is who like this topic most or dislike this topic most. So you are actually picking up two extremes people. Okay, that might be a case. Okay, so you can see the advantages is, as you say, cheap, less time consuming. You can quickly have your sample selected. Okay, but the problem is your sample become unrestricted. You did not have control who is actually responding, and also, as I said, that probably you will pick up some extreme people because they are taking part in the survey because they are very interested about this. For example, if you have a survey in terms of like environmental protection, okay, now you will probably pick up only those people who are very much interested or who have very much interest on environmental protection. So your sample become very biased, not very representative one. Panel sample, nowadays it's popular that you use panel samples. Panel samples means there are some research organization or there are some commercial organizations who have a predetermined panel of respondents. Okay, predetermined panel of respondents, and those respondents have already expressed their willingness to take part in a survey. So as a researcher, what you can do is you can use this panel sample in exchange of some fees. Okay, nowadays, like I don't know whether that's very ethical or not. It's a big issue in different universities that previously PhD students used to collect data, the survey data by themselves, but nowadays what they are doing, typically what they are doing is they are going to different commercial organizations and they are paying a couple of $1,000s to get the survey done by those commercial organizations, because those organizations have a panel sample, they have a list of respondents, so they send the surveys to those respondents and pay some money, maybe $20, $50 for each of the surveys, and they get it done. So previously, when like PhD students used to spend maybe 6 months to do a survey, now they do it maybe within a couple of weeks by, say, $5,000 or so. So nowadays it's an issue that some professors do not like that their students get the survey done by someone else in exchange of money. So they want that their PhD students collect the data by themselves, but others are not bothered by those. So it's a bit of like debatable issue in different universities. Anyway, so as a researcher, you can use these panel samples. Those actually are the commercial organizations.
Are they allowed to do that though?
They are.
Is it just
They are.
valuable?
No, they are allowed to do that. So you are, they are actually a sort of service organization. You are getting service from them. You say you are supposed to do the survey by yourself, but they are doing it on behalf of you.
No, because for example, me as an attorney, if I have to pay somebody else, or if they give me a percentage of their work, I can be just boss. I just, you know.
There is possibility.
Yeah.
There is possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. So we will be discussing about some of those issues in our workshop questions as well. And then recruited ad hoc samples. This is also sometimes we use. Ad hoc, you understand the meaning of ad hoc. It's actually temporary. So you know that sometimes, like when we go to buy something or when we go to visit a certain place, sometimes we get probably a piece of paper where they ask us to provide our, say, phone number or our email address, and they ask us that whether we will be willing to take part in a survey or not. In this way, sometimes some companies try to create a temporary samples and try to conduct a survey among those people. So what they actually do is they first of all send, let's say, a sort of approval requirement to those people, and they ask them that will you be willing to take part in a survey. Then if they say yes, then they send the survey to them. Okay, so they collect this type of temporary samples from maybe when they are launching a particular product, maybe they are launching a particular services. They get responses from the people. So in summary, what we have covered today is we started with discussing why do we need sample. That means instead of going to a census, why you go for sampling. Then we discussed different types of sampling technique. And last of all, what are the factors we need to consider when we decide about a particular sampling technique. Any question? Any problem? Okay, then we have 5 minutes break now, and we will meet in the computer lab after 5 minutes. Yes. We will go to a computer lab in the building near to us. I mean, this building, it's called University House.
I cannot tell when everybody's picking up and moving my stuff.
No, we will going to the computer lab because we will be doing some small exercises. Excuse me, she's new to this class. Can you just escort to computer lab? Thank you.
下一周就交不了了。这个车很重要，后面去。
That's responsible for her, or any places.